The office was quiet, far quieter than it usually was during the day. The hum of computers and the distant sounds of phones ringing had long faded. It was late, the kind of late when most people had already gone home, leaving behind an empty building that felt too big for one person to fill. The only sound now was the soft click of a clock ticking away in the corner of the reception area, marking the passing minutes as if reminding the room that time was still moving forward, even though everything else was still. In the far corner of the lobby, there was a grand piano, a beautiful instrument with polished wood and keys that gleamed softly under the fluorescent lights. It was one of those things no one really paid much attention to. It had been there since the company was founded, a relic from another time. No one really used it. It was just something that added a bit of charm to the otherwise stark and modern office space. But tonight was different. She had stayed behind to finish some work, as usual, answering a few last calls and making sure everything was in order before heading out. But when the last of the office lights flickered off and she was left alone, she felt an almost magnetic pull toward the piano. She wasn't a professional musician. Far from it. In fact, most people who saw her working at the front desk would never guess she even knew how to play an instrument. But music had always been a part of her life. It wasn't something she often shared with others, too personal, too vulnerable. But in the stillness of the empty office, she allowed herself a moment of peace. With a deep breath, she walked over to the piano. She ran her fingers lightly over the cool, smooth surface of the keys. The touch felt familiar, like reconnecting with something she'd forgotten she loved. She sat down, her back straight and her fingers poised above the keys. For a moment she hesitated. It felt strange to be playing in the quiet of a nearly empty building, but the thought of leaving without giving in to the pull of the music made her feel uneasy. With a soft exhale, she pressed the first key. The sound was light, almost shy, but it filled the space with an unexpected warmth. It was as if the room itself had been waiting for this moment, for the music to bring it to life again. Her fingers moved more confidently now, and with each note the melody started to take shape. She wasn't playing anything too complex, just a few simple chords strung together. But they felt good. The music flowed, slowly at first, then faster as she began to lose herself in it. She didn't even think about what she was playing. Her hands moved almost on their own, like the piano was guiding her. It wasn't a piece she had practiced. In fact, it wasn't really anything that could be called a song yet. It was more like a collection of feelings, emotions that had built up inside of her over time. It was the stress from long work days, the frustration of things not always going as planned, and even the moments of quiet joy when everything felt right in the world. All of those feelings spilled out through the piano, and for a brief moment she felt light, as though she had let go of something heavy. She had never played in front of anyone before. Not like this. She'd played in her bedroom when she was younger, just for herself. And even now, with the room empty, she couldn't help but feel a little self-conscious. What if someone heard her? What if they thought she was silly or out of place? But the music had a way of easing those thoughts away. Each note seemed to push aside the doubts, the insecurities, until she felt nothing but the melody surrounding her. The music had become more than just sound. It was a release, a small piece of freedom she couldn't find anywhere else in her busy life. She closed her eyes for a moment, just letting the music take over. The tension she didn't even realize she was holding in her shoulders slowly began to melt away. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this calm. In fact, she wasn't sure she had ever felt this peaceful. And then, as if time had stopped, the sound of a door opening broke the stillness. She froze, her fingers hovering above the keys, the last note of her melody hanging in the air. For a brief, terrifying moment, she thought she'd been caught. But before she could pull her hands away, she heard a sound that made her heart skip. Footsteps. Someone was walking into the lobby. She didn't turn around, too embarrassed to face whoever it was. Maybe they wouldn't notice. Maybe they would just walk by and forget about her playing. But the footsteps stopped just behind her. "That was beautiful," a voice said softly. Her hands froze. She felt a rush of heat in her cheeks, her mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. Slowly she turned her head. Standing just a few feet away, with his hands in his pockets, was the CEO. The same person who ran the company, the man who always seemed to be too busy for anything that wasn't work-related. He was the last person she had ever expected to find in the lobby at this hour, let alone listening to her play. His expression was unreadable, But there was something in his eyes, something warm, maybe even a little surprised. "I didn't know you could play," he said, his voice low but genuine. That was really impressive. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words caught in her throat. What was she supposed to say? "Thank you" seemed too small, too simple. She cleared her throat, hoping her embarrassment wasn't too obvious. I just play sometimes," she muttered. "I didn't mean for you to hear." He gave a small smile as if to put her at ease. "I'm glad I did," he said. "You're very talented." She glanced at him, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't like she was a professional after all. She was just someone who played to feel something, not to impress anyone. But his praise felt different. It wasn't the kind of polite compliment people gave when they didn't know what else to say. There was something real in his voice, something that made her think maybe, just maybe, he wasn't just being polite. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The room felt oddly intimate now, as if the music had bridged some unspoken gap between them. Here was the CEO, a figure who seemed so distant in the everyday work life, standing in front of her like any other person who might have happened upon her playing. And here she was, someone who had spent most of her days behind the front desk, now sharing a part of herself she had kept hidden. She looked down at the piano, not sure how to break the silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt awkward. It was the kind that felt like something important had just passed between them, something that didn't need to be said out loud. Finally, the CEO cleared his throat and took a step back. "Well," he said, "I'll let you get back to what you were doing, but thank you for letting me hear that. It's nice to know there's more to people than we sometimes see." With that, he turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing softly behind him. She sat there for a moment, unsure of what had just happened. It was the kind of encounter that didn't make sense at first, but in hindsight it would linger with her, shaping everything that came after. For a long while, the piano remained silent, but the air seemed to hum with something new. Something had shifted, and in a way she knew it had everything to do with the music she had shared, and with the unexpected moment that had brought her and the CEO together in a way neither had expected. The next day everything felt like it had returned to normal, or at least it seemed that way on the surface. The usual bustle of the office filled the air, with the clicking of keyboards and the soft murmur of phone calls. People came and went, walking past the reception desk without much thought. There was always a constant hum of activity, everyone caught up in their own little world, but for her it was as though something had shifted, even if no one else could tell. She sat at the desk as usual, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of her notepad while she glanced at the phone, waiting for the next call to come in. She couldn't stop thinking about the night before, the music, the piano, and most of all the CEO. His quiet presence in the lobby had been a surprise, but what lingered with her wasn't just his unexpected arrival, it was his reaction to her playing. He hadn't just heard her, he had listened. There was a difference, she thought. It had been so long since anyone had really listened to her, to anything she created. Even as a child, her piano playing had always been something she kept to herself. Music was her escape, her release. She didn't perform for anyone else's approval or praise. But last night, when the CEO had stood there and acknowledged the music, it had felt different. His words had meant something. He hadn't just been polite. He had genuinely appreciated it. But this was still work. The next morning, it was as if everything was back to business as usual. People passed by her desk asking for directions, checking in on visitors, or asking for basic information. It was easy to slip back into the role of the receptionist, just as she always did. Yet as the day wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The thought of her music lingered in the back of her mind, and she found herself wishing she could sit at that piano again, even for just a few moments. She wasn't sure why. It wasn't like anyone was asking her to perform. But there was something in the way the music had made her feel the night before, something she couldn't explain. She hadn't played in a long time, not like that. It was almost as though the piano had pulled something out of her that she had forgotten about. Around mid-afternoon, she glanced over at the piano, tucked quietly in the corner of the lobby. It looked as it always had, unassuming, almost invisible amidst the daily rush of office life. But today she noticed it differently. The piano seemed to beckon her, calling her to play once again. She wasn't sure why, but she stood up from her desk and walked over to it, her heart beating just a little faster. Maybe she could just play for a few minutes before the office crowd came back from lunch. The soft echo of the keys would surely go unnoticed by the rest of the team. No one had ever paid attention to the piano anyway. She sat down on the bench again, her fingers brushing the keys lightly, almost as if testing them. The soft sound echoed in the empty lobby. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to play. The night before, she had let the music flow naturally, letting it take shape as she played. But today she felt the weight of her thoughts. She couldn't quite shake the memory of the CEO standing there watching her. She didn't want to think too much about it. Music had always been something private, something she did for herself, not for an audience. But the thought of him hearing her again, it made her wonder what it would be like to play for him a second time. Would he still be impressed? Or would he see her differently? It was silly to think that way, she told herself. But there it was, that seed of doubt. After a few moments of indecision, she began to play again, this time a little more slowly, almost cautiously. The sound of the keys filled the air, soft and tentative. She wasn't sure what she was trying to express. There was no real plan. It was just music, flowing from her fingertips like water, each note more confident than the last. The melody seemed to settle in her mind, taking shape as it went along until she found a rhythm she liked. It wasn't a song, not really. It was just a feeling. Her feeling. She didn't notice at first, but as she played, her movements became more fluid, more confident. The hesitation that had held her back earlier slowly faded, and with each note she felt herself sinking deeper into the music. Her hands danced across the keys, the rhythm building in a way that felt natural, like the sound was flowing from her, not from the piano itself. It wasn't until she reached the end of the short melody that she heard the footsteps. She froze, her fingers lingering on the last chord, not daring to look up. There was a small part of her that hoped it was just her imagination, that no one was listening, that she was still in her little world of music. But when she did look up, her heart skipped a beat. Standing in the doorway of the lobby, watching her with a look of quiet interest, was the CEO. He had a small smile on his face, but his eyes were focused on her hands as they rested on the keys. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The music had faded, leaving behind a kind of silence that was thick and heavy. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, her hands growing cold from the sudden stop in the flow of her playing. "I didn't mean to interrupt," the CEO said after a long pause, his voice calm but warm. "I hope I didn't catch you off guard." She quickly shook her head, feeling a bit flustered. "No, it's fine. I was just playing." He stepped further into the lobby, his shoes clicking softly against the floor. "You have a way with the piano," he said, his tone genuine. That was beautiful. She didn't know how to respond. His words had caught her off guard, and she was suddenly unsure of what to say. "It's just something I do. On my own," she replied quietly, feeling the weight of his gaze. "I didn't think anyone would notice." His smile grew slightly, as if he could see through her uncertainty. "I noticed," he said softly, "and I'm glad I did." She felt a wave of warmth spread through her chest at his words. It wasn't the kind of compliment she was used to hearing. People usually just said things like "nice job" or "good work," the kind of praise that felt obligatory. But his words felt different, more sincere. They stood there for a moment, an awkward but peaceful silence between them. She wasn't sure why she felt so nervous. After all, he was just a person like anyone else. But there was something about the way he spoke to her that made her feel both seen and vulnerable at the same time. After a moment, the CEO broke the silence. "If you ever feel like sharing your music again, I'd be happy to listen," he said, his voice casual but kind. "You don't have to, of course, but it would be a privilege to hear it again." His words left her speechless. She didn't know how to respond. She wasn't sure if he meant it or if he was just being polite. But something told her that he wasn't just being kind for the sake of it. There was something real in his tone, something that made her believe that maybe he genuinely wanted to hear more of what she could play. "I'll think about it," she finally said, her voice quieter than usual. He nodded, his smile still soft but sincere. "Take your time," he said. "I just wanted you to know that your music matters. It's rare to find something so honest." With that, he turned and left the room, his footsteps fading away down the hall. She sat there for a long time afterward, her fingers resting lightly on the piano keys, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a song that hadn't quite ended. She didn't know what to make of the moment, but she knew one thing. Something had shifted, something had changed. It wasn't just the music. It was the way she saw herself, the way she saw her work, the way she saw the people around her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could do something more with the music inside her, something bigger than herself, something real. The next few days passed by in a blur, but something had changed in her. It wasn't obvious at first, and it wasn't something anyone else could see. She still sat at her desk, still answered the phones, and still greeted visitors with a polite smile. But beneath all that, there was a quiet shift, a feeling of possibility that hadn't been there before. She found herself thinking about the piano more often than she ever had before. It wasn't just the music itself, but the way she had felt when she played and the way it had felt when the CEO had listened. Every time she sat at her desk, her eyes would wander over to the corner of the lobby where the piano sat. It was as if it was calling her, asking her to come back, to play again. But there was hesitation, too. She wasn't sure if she should. It wasn't like anyone was asking her to perform, and the last thing she wanted was to make the office feel uncomfortable. Most of the time, she played just for herself. But what if someone noticed again? What if the CEO heard her once more? She wasn't sure if she was ready for that, and the thought of it made her nervous. Still, something inside her told her to give in to the urge, to sit down at the piano and play the way she had the other night. It wasn't about anyone else, it was about her. One afternoon after lunch, when the office had quieted down a little, she found herself standing up and walking toward the piano again. There was no one around, no one to watch or listen, just the music and the empty space. She sat down slowly, letting her fingers hover above the keys for a moment, just breathing in the stillness of the room. There was a kind of peace in this space, a calm that made her feel like she could finally let go of everything else. She started playing again, this time a little more confidently. The notes were simple, familiar, nothing grand, just a slow, soothing melody. It felt good, and she let herself get lost in the music, each note flowing into the next. As she played, she found herself thinking less about what she was doing and more about how it felt. The piano had a way of taking away her thoughts, of making everything else disappear. It was just her and the music, and in that moment, that was enough. She had no expectations, no pressure. She didn't need to prove anything, and then, out of nowhere, she heard a sound that stopped her mid-play. Footsteps. Someone was coming down the hall. She froze, her hands frozen above the keys, her heart suddenly racing. It was a reflex, a panic, a fear that she had been caught doing something she shouldn't. But as quickly as the footsteps had appeared, they stopped and she heard a voice. "That's beautiful," the voice said. Calm and warm, she looked up. And there he was again, the CEO standing at the doorway, looking at her with a gentle smile on his face. He didn't seem surprised or judgmental, just appreciative. Like he had been waiting for this moment too. Her fingers rested on the keys, but she couldn't bring herself to play again. She felt a flush of warmth spread across her cheeks. She hadn't expected him to be there. She hadn't expected anyone to hear her, let alone him. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, his tone reassuring. I heard the music from the hallway. It's really something." She swallowed, unsure of how to respond. "I didn't think anyone was around," she mumbled. "I wasn't expecting anyone to hear me." He stepped a little closer, his expression thoughtful. "You're really good," he said, his voice low. "You should play more often. People would love to hear it." She looked at him, unsure of what to say. She wasn't used to compliments like that, not like this. He wasn't just saying it out of politeness. He seemed to mean it. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "It's just something I do for myself. I'm not sure if anyone would want to hear it. I don't even know why I keep playing, really. It's just a way for me to relax, I guess." He smiled again, but this time there was a softness to it. "Sometimes the best things are the ones we do for ourselves," he said. "But that doesn't mean they can't be shared." His words struck something deep inside her. For a long time she had kept everything she loved to herself. Her music, her thoughts, even her dreams. It wasn't that she didn't want to share them, but somewhere along the way, she had convinced herself that they weren't important enough to share. She couldn't help but wonder, what would it be like if she let someone else hear the things that mattered to her? What if the music she created could actually make someone else feel something, like it had made her feel? It was a scary thought, but it was also kind of exciting. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice quiet. She wasn't sure if she was ready to share her music with anyone else, let alone the people she worked with every day. But something about his words gave her a sense of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to take that step. The CEO stood there for a moment longer, his eyes soft but serious. "You should," he said. "You really should." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the lobby once again. But this time the silence didn't feel as empty. The music was still with her, lingering in the air like a quiet promise. She sat there for a few more minutes, her hands resting lightly on the piano keys, thinking about what he had said. Could she really play for others? Could she let the music leave the safety of her own space and share it with the people around her? It wasn't just about being good enough. It was about whether she was ready to let something personal, something that had always been hers, be seen by others. The next few days were filled with a quiet excitement she couldn't quite explain. Every time she walked past the piano, she thought about what the CEO had said. The idea of playing for others was still a little scary, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt like something she could do. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to have everything figured out. She just had to be brave enough to play. On Friday afternoon, the office was quieter than usual. Most of the staff had already left for the day, and the building was almost empty. She found herself standing by the piano again, staring at the keys. The thought of playing was still there, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just about playing for herself anymore. It was about taking that step. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She was nervous, but it didn't matter. She had made up her mind. Slowly, she began to play, her fingers moving over the keys with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The melody was soft at first, just like before, but this time it felt different. There was something in the air, something that made her feel like she was doing exactly what she was supposed to do. And then, without thinking about it too much, she began to play louder, more confidently, the notes filling the space around her. She played as though no one was listening, as though the music belonged only to her. But in the back of her mind, she knew that maybe, just maybe, the music was for someone else too. The following week felt different. The days seemed to move a little slower, but in a way, that gave her more space to think. About her music, about the piano, and about everything the CEO had said to her. The words he had spoken still echoed in her mind. "You should share your music." He had said it so simply, but it had stuck with her more than she realized. At first, she had tried to ignore it. It was easy to push aside those kinds of thoughts. She had always kept her music to herself. She wasn't a performer. She was just someone who enjoyed playing when no one was around. But that small spark of possibility had been lit inside her, and it was harder and harder to ignore. It was one of those days when the office was unusually quiet. The last of the afternoon light filtered in through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. Most of the staff had gone home for the day, and the building had a peaceful, almost empty feeling. The usual buzz of voices and clatter of keyboards was gone. It was just the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. She sat at her desk, trying to focus on the tasks in front of her. But every so often, her gaze would drift over to the corner where the piano stood. It was almost like it was calling her again, that silent invitation to play. That afternoon, something inside her shifted. She wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the stillness of the office or the way the sunlight hit the piano, casting a soft glow over the keys. Whatever it was, she felt a sudden urge to get up and walk over to it. Her heart beat a little faster as she stood up from her desk and made her way across the lobby. There was no one around to watch. No one would be in the building for hours, and she felt a quiet, peaceful sense of solitude that made her feel safe. She sat down at the piano, her fingers lightly resting on the keys. It wasn't about performing. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about something much simpler. It was about connecting to herself again, finding that space where the music could come out and fill the silence. For a long moment, she did nothing but sit there, her fingers hovering above the keys, unsure of what to play. She had played so many times before, so many little melodies that came and went, but this time it felt different. The air around her felt still, waiting for something to happen. Then, without thinking, her fingers pressed down on the first few notes. It was the same melody she had played before, the one that had come to her so naturally the night the CEO had heard her. But this time it felt freer, more fluid. The notes flowed out of her as if they had been waiting to escape, tumbling one after another in a seamless pattern. As the melody continued, she felt the stress of the past few days start to melt away. The quiet rhythm of the piano, the sound of the keys beneath her fingers, it was all she needed. She didn't have to think about anything else. It was just the music, just the moment. And then, without warning, she heard a door creak open. Her heart skipped a beat and she froze for a second, afraid that someone had caught her. But when she looked up, she saw that it was the CEO standing in the doorway. This time he wasn't just a fleeting presence. He was standing there, watching her with the same quiet expression he always wore. His eyes were focused on her hands as they moved over the keys, following the rhythm of the song. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Should she stop? Should she apologize? Should she ask him to leave? But when he didn't move, when he didn't speak, she realized that he wasn't there to stop her. He wasn't there to criticize her or make her feel awkward. He was just listening. His presence didn't make her nervous anymore. It didn't make her feel self-conscious. Instead, there was something comforting about him standing there, watching her in silence. She kept playing, this time letting the music grow a little bolder, a little louder. It was almost as if the music had taken on a life of its own, and she was no longer controlling it. The notes were flowing from her, from somewhere deep inside, and she didn't want to stop. When the song finally came to an end, she let her fingers rest on the keys, the last note lingering in the air. The silence that followed felt heavy, but not in a bad way. It was the kind of silence that felt full, as though the music had filled the room completely. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The CEO was still standing in the doorway, his expression thoughtful. She couldn't bring herself to look at him, her hands still resting on the keys, her heart racing. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but warm. "That was beautiful," he said. "I didn't know you had that in you." She blinked, unsure of how to respond. "I just play when I can," she said quietly. "I didn't think it was anything special." He shook his head slightly, his eyes still on her. "It's more than special," he said. "It's rare and it's real. You should be proud of it." She felt her chest tighten at his words. It was hard to hear someone say something so kind about her music, something she had always kept to herself. She didn't know how to react. She wasn't used to hearing compliments like that, especially not about something so personal. "I don't know if I'm ready to play for everyone," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "It's just something I've always done for myself. I'm not sure if I could do it in front of other people." He stepped into the room a little more, his gaze softening. "You don't have to play for everyone," he said. "But don't let fear stop you from sharing something that could inspire others. Your music has something to give." She wasn't sure what to say to that. His words made her feel like maybe there was something more to her music than she had ever allowed herself to believe. But it was hard to imagine sharing it with others. What if they didn't understand? What if they didn't care? "Just think about it," he added, his voice gentle. "You never know who might need to hear it." With that, he smiled, a quiet smile that held no pressure, no expectation, just encouragement. "I'll leave you to it," he said. "But if you ever want to share your music, I'll be here to listen." And with that, he left, his footsteps fading as he walked down the hall. She sat there for a long time, her fingers still resting on the piano keys, the echoes of the music slowly fading away. It wasn't just the music that had shifted something inside her. It was the way she had felt when she played, the way he had listened and the way he had made her feel like what she did mattered. It was a small thing, but it felt big. For the first time, she realized that maybe her music didn't have to stay locked away, hidden in a corner of the lobby or in the back of her mind. Maybe it could be something more. Maybe it could be shared. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. It was still scary to think about sharing her music with others. It was still uncertain, but the fear wasn't as loud now. It wasn't the only thing she could hear. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel so alone with her music. The following days passed slowly, but in a way that felt almost peaceful. It was like she had entered a different kind of rhythm, one that had a soft, quiet pulse beneath it. She found herself thinking about her music more often, even when she was sitting at her desk, answering the phone or typing emails. The memory of the CEO's words, the way he had encouraged her, kept coming back to her. "You should be proud of it." She didn't know why those words had stayed with her for so long. After all, she had heard compliments before, but somehow this one felt different. The CEO hadn't just said that her music was good. He had made her feel like it mattered. He had made her feel like it was something worth sharing, something more than just a way to pass the time. That afternoon, the office was buzzing with activity. People were getting ready to leave for the weekend, packing up their things, chatting with coworkers. The usual noise filled the air, laughter, the clinking of keyboards, the shuffle of papers, but she found it hard to focus. Her mind kept drifting back to the piano in the corner of the lobby. It had been a few days since she had played. A few days since the CEO had heard her. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a strange pull toward it again, a quiet excitement mixed with a hint of fear, the kind of feeling that made her both want to run away and lean in all at once. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. You should play for others. It was still a scary thought. She had always kept her music to herself, always played when no one was around, when there was no one to hear or judge. But now it felt like maybe it wasn't just about playing anymore. Maybe it was about giving something, offering something that she hadn't even realized she had to give. It was a Friday afternoon, and the office was nearly empty. The usual hum of activity had quieted, and she found herself standing by the piano once more, unsure of what to do. She had played so many times before, but this time felt different. It wasn't just about playing a few simple notes. It was about sharing something that had always been hers. Her fingers rested on the keys, hesitant at first, but as she let them settle, something inside her clicked. The fear wasn't gone. It was still there, lurking at the back of her mind, but it wasn't as loud anymore. She felt a little more confident, a little more willing to take the leap. Without overthinking it, she pressed down on the first few notes. The melody was soft at first, simple, like a quiet greeting to the world. She played slowly, each note deliberate, each pause thoughtful. The music wrapped around her, and she allowed herself to get lost in it. It was a moment of peace, a moment where everything else fell away. The office, the people, the stress of the week, none of it mattered. It was just her and the piano, and for once it felt like enough. She didn't know how long she played. Maybe it was minutes, maybe it was hours. The time seemed to slip away from her, but she didn't mind. She was too focused on the music, too caught up in the feeling of each note, each chord, as it filled the air around her. And then, just as she was starting to lose herself in the music, she heard footsteps. The door to the lobby opened, and she didn't need to look up to know who it was. She had heard those footsteps enough to recognize them. The CEO was standing there again, watching her from the doorway. This time, she didn't stop. She didn't freeze or panic. She kept playing, even though her heart was racing. She didn't know why, but it felt different this time. It felt like it was okay to keep going, like it was okay for him to listen. She wasn't playing for anyone, at least not at first, but as the music continued, she realized that maybe she was. When the song finally ended, the silence that followed felt heavy. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment. Her fingers rested on the keys, her heart still thumping in her chest. She didn't know what to expect, didn't know if he would say anything at all, but then he spoke, his voice soft and calm. "That was amazing," he said, his words sincere, almost quiet. "You have a gift." She looked up at him, unsure of what to say. She wasn't used to hearing such praise, not for something so personal. It was hard to believe that the music she had played could mean so much to someone else. But there was something in his voice that made her believe it. That made her feel like maybe she wasn't just wasting time, playing for no one. "I don't know if it's really anything special," she said, her voice tentative, unsure. He shook his head, his smile gentle. "It's special," he said. "You just have to believe it. You have something that not many people have, and it deserves to be shared." She felt a knot in her stomach tighten, but it wasn't the same tightness as before. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something else. Something more like hope. Something that made her think that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take the next step. "Maybe I could share it," she said slowly, her voice quieter now. "But I'm not sure how to start. I don't know if I could just play for everyone." "You don't have to," he said. "Start small. Start with one person. Maybe one day you'll feel ready to share it with more people, but don't rush it. Take your time." His words were like a weight lifting from her shoulders. She had been so focused on the idea of playing for everyone that she had forgotten that she didn't need to do it all at once. She didn't need to perform for an audience or give a grand show. She could start small. She could start with the people who cared, the ones who would listen because they wanted to hear her, not because they expected something from her. He smiled again, and for the first time in a long time she smiled back. It wasn't a big smile, but it was enough. Enough to make her feel like maybe she had taken the first step. Maybe it was the beginning of something new, something that had always been there, just waiting to be discovered. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "Thank you for listening. I didn't think anyone would care." He nodded, his eyes kind. "You'd be surprised," he said. "Sometimes the things we think are small or unimportant can have the biggest impact." She sat there for a moment, taking in his words. There was still uncertainty inside her, still a small voice that wondered if she was making the right choice. But the voice of doubt wasn't as loud as it used to be. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe she didn't need to have everything figured out right away. Maybe she could take it one step at a time. As the days passed, she found herself playing more often. It wasn't for anyone else, not at first. But she played with a new sense of freedom, a new sense of purpose. Slowly, she began to think about sharing her music with others, not as a performance, but as something real, something from the heart. She didn't know when it would happen, or who would be the first to hear it. But she knew that when the time came, she would be ready. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally being true to herself, letting go of the fear and embracing the possibility of something new. And that, in itself, was enough.